Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are. Thank you for joining us for another exciting and riveting episode of Out of the Pit. Today, we're going to be talking about Bibles and Bible translation. Which is right, which is wrong, which should you have, which should you avoid, and this is going to be a fun one. This is just going to be a fun one. So, before we get started though, if you would, please like, comment, subscribe, do all those things that help us and cost you nothing. We appreciate that very much. Today we're going to be talking about Bibles and Bible translation. This can be a point of contention with a lot of people. There are some King James only people out there. And just to start off and preface whatever, I want to say that I have absolutely nothing against the King James Bible. Nada. That being said, I do not believe that the King James Bible is the only Bible that you should have or read. And I got a few things I want to talk about and share with you today. And so I hope you join me and stick around for the whole journey. I'll try to make it as entertaining as possible. But before we came up with this particular video, it just so happened that last Saturday, some of the ladies at our church are doing a women's group once a month. And one lady came to the women's group. She had a Bible. And you know what? I'm not even going to tell you what version it was. But she had a Bible. She was able to read it. And she read it in front of everybody. But after she read it, she had no idea what it meant. And I do understand that sometimes there are Bible passages like in Revelation or, right now I'm going through Daniel and I'm reading some of Daniel and I'm reading it and I know every single word that I read, but when I go through Daniel or I go through Revelation, sometimes the things that I read I don't really understand. So there's that, but then there's situations where we read something and we're not getting it because of maybe words that were used or the way the sentence structure is. And so I just like to talk to you a little bit about that. When it comes to Bibles, I think that you ought to have one that you can read and that you can understand. And I'll say within reason. There are certain things that I like to steer towards, and there are certain things I like to steer away from. I'll give you a couple of words today. One word is translation. The second word is transliteration. They sound similar, but they are different. So most Bibles are translations where they go word for word and they translate from either the Greek, the Hebrew. The New Testament was written in Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. And so, when they translate into English, they will go word for word. And so, in order to translate, the translator must have a very good understanding of, we'll say Greek, if we're translating from Greek. The translator must have a really good understanding of the Greek language and the English language that's being translated into. I'm a fan of translations, okay? When it comes to transliteration, that means something a little bit different, where instead of maybe going word for word, when we transliterate, we just try to get the bulk, the main idea from what's being said. Um, Sometimes that's okay. Um, Sometimes I think that they get a little too free with that. There's a passage, I believe it's in John, where um, in the King James it says that uh, oh, forgive me, I might butcher this, so I apologize, but it says that like Jesus was crucified on the second to last day of the week, um, and then in the NIV it says he was crucified on like Friday, or he was crucified on the last day of the week, and then in the NIV it says he was crucified on Saturday or whatever it is. Um, the translation would be he was crucified on the last day of the week. The transliteration is he was crucified on Saturday. Um, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it can be. um, I think it's very important for you to be a good steward of your Bible. I think you ought to be reading it. Um, that being said, if you are having difficulty in reading the King's English, reading Old English, I would just encourage you to get a version that you are going to read and that you can understand. I had somebody ask me on Wednesday night at church. They asked me, what version of the Bible do I recommend? And as of right now, subject to change, my recommendation for people that would like to really start reading their Bible is I recommend New King James. And I want to explain to you why I recommend that. I recommend New King James because that is the Bible I preach from on Sunday morning. And so, if this is the Bible I'm preaching from on Sunday morning, and my church member is asking me, what Bible should I get? I'm going to recommend them a Bible that will be word for word what I am reading to them on a Sunday morning. I had one gentleman at church. I started when I started preaching at Pleasant Hill. I was preaching from an NIV Bible, and at our church we supply Bibles in the pews, and so I'm at the pulpit. I'm preaching from an NIV Bible. In the pews are a bunch of King James Bibles, and so for months, people were trying to follow along, and it was hard to follow along whenever I'm preaching from one version and they're reading or they're looking at a completely different version. And so we made a decision as a church that I would switch. I made a decision for myself that I was going to switch to New King James, and we as a church made a decision to buy New King James Bibles for the pews. That way, anybody who came, we could all be on the same page. I do not recommend New King James because I think it's the most stellar, awesome, only version in the world. I recommend it because that's what I use, and so I want us to have continuity whenever I'm preaching. I want people to be able to follow along. Now, I grew up reading NIV, and most of the Bible verses that I still have memorized, I have memorized in NIV. And I know there was some people that made a fuss about the NIV Bible because it had verses missing or it had extra verses. And in the NIV Bible that I have, in the footnotes, it explained why there was verses taken away or added. And the reason why people made a big fuss is because in the book of Revelations, at the end of Revelations, it says that, anyone who takes away from the testimony of this book, God will take away his name from the book of life, and anybody who adds to the testimony of this book, God will add to him the plagues that are found in this book. Now, so whenever the NIV Bible had things missing or added, and especially in the Gospels, is where you ran into this a lot. The Gospel of John has verses that are either not there or added, and so people would go to Revelations and they would say, "Hey, the NIV Bible's horrible because it's got this one added or this one taken away." And Revelations says that this God's going to take away that name and going to add to you these plagues. And I'm like, well, that's not exactly completely true, because when John wrote Revelation, he didn't have the manuscript of Genesis to Revelation that I'm carrying right here today. And whenever John said that, it was in regards to Revelation itself. That being said, whenever people would bring this up, it caused me to wonder too, because I'm like, why does the NIV have things added or taken away? And so it took like a 5-minute study to figure this out. But when the King James Version was written, there was a certain number of manuscripts that were available for translation. Well, if we fast forward from the time the King James Bible was translated and penned, if we fast forward to now, we have found and have so many more manuscripts of these books. And real quick, our Bible is one book made up of 66 other books, okay? So over the years, we have found more manuscripts of Matthew's Gospel. We found more manuscripts of Daniel or Isaiah or Mark, And so what translators have done, and the NIV Bible that I have explains this in the footnotes. The reason why some verses are in or out of the NIV is because of the documents or the manuscripts that they chose to translate. And so we are just trying to get the best, most accurate information as possible. There is nothing wrong with the King James Bible. I don't believe there's anything wrong with New King James. I don't have anything wrong with the NIV prior to like 2000 or 2001. I will say, kind of as a disclaimer on that, I think it was after the 2000s, 2001, 2002, somewhere in that vicinity, the NIV started using some more gender neutral terms that I could do without. If the original Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, if it said man, if it said woman, I'd say just leave it alone. Don't say they. That's just me, though. But I want to kind of talk about how some people get really, really wrapped around the axle on being only this version or only that version. I was talking to my brother before we started recording today, and I have actually heard people go as far as to say that anything outside of the King James Bible could be considered the mark of the beast. And I'm just like, wow. We will find anything to create division, and then we will broaden that gap and beat that thing to death. I had a man. It's probably 2 or 3 years ago. He was at my house, and he was having some trouble with the translation that he had, and so he asked me. He said, "What translation should I get?" He said, "I want to read my Bible. I want to understand it, but I don't want to be in the wrong." He said, "So what translation do I get?" So we had about a 5 or 10 minute conversation, and I told him there was some that I liked, and I gave him those. And then the same guy who asked me what translation should he get, he looked at me, same same day, same time. He said, I believe that God loves us so much that if we are trying to read his word and learn more about him and trying to understand him, he said this. He said, I don't believe that he would turn away from us just because we had an ESV versus a New King James or an NIV or a whatever. And when he said that, I was just like, man, I think there's so much wisdom there. You know, if we are trying to love Jesus and we're trying to serve him and we're trying to do what we can and we have an NIV, I do not believe for one moment that he's going to turn away from us because we have an NIV versus a KJV. And anybody who would say that he would, I think that is just a horrible statement to make. Now, I'll say this too. There are some Bibles that I won't get. I believe one of them is the Message Bible. I feel like that takes way too many freedoms, and I don't I don't consider that a translation at all because it's not. And so, if I was going to say give one to stay away from, I'd say please stay away from the Message Bible. Um, the King James version. Uh, the King James version was written on a third grade reading level, and I have absolutely nothing against the King James version. Um, I don't preach from one because I just prefer the sentence structure better in the New King James, and I prefer the sentence structures in the NIV better as well. But when it comes to Bibles, um, find a good translation. Some good ones out there are going to be King James, New King James, NIV, ESV, and there's probably two or three others that would be considered very good translations. By leaving some out, I'm not trying to say one's any better than another, but I just listed off four that I thought were really good. And the most important thing is to open it up and just start reading it. And once you start reading it, continue to read it. And something that I started doing years ago, um, when you do get to a place that is a little bit hard or it gets a little sticky in understanding, pray. Ask the Lord, what are you trying to tell me through this? And ask him to release his wisdom and knowledge and understanding to you so that you can understand what you're reading. And it may not be a horrible idea to start off, pray that prayer before you open the Bible. Say, Lord, I know that you sent this to me. I know that you got stuff in here for me. So help me to understand. Give me the wisdom and knowledge that I need to understand. And then open it up and start running. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I don't know if we cleared anything up or not. If you were a King James only person, then you'll probably still be that way after this video. And if you're not, then you'll probably stay not after this video. The most important thing is to open it up and start reading it. find a good translation. And something else, you know, find out what your pastor's preaching from. And I would at least start there. And if he's preaching from King James, ask him why he's doing that. If he's preaching from NIV, ask him why they're doing that. You know, have that talk, have that communication. But yeah, I think that's where we're going to leave it off with today. Before we dismiss, though, the most important thing is relationship with Jesus Christ. My brother-in-law said something this week, and I wrote it down. He said, religion without relationship is idolatry. You know, you can have very aggressive feelings on one Bible version over another Bible version. But if we don't have a relationship with Jesus, then what we do is we unintentionally turn into a bunch of Pharisees, and we start worshiping the methods over the method giver. So have a relationship with Jesus, because that's the thing that's the most important. If you can grow and develop that relationship with Jesus, I believe that he's going to lead you in what version to get or not get. And I also believe that he is so good and gracious that he can use whatever version's in your hand. So, until next time, God bless.